Hello, I'm Richard Wrightson from Wrightson Automotive, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about this 1965 Gordon Keeble. But first of all, I probably need to give you a little bit of a backstory on Gordon Keeble, because most of you are going to be saying, what's a Gordon Keeble? And you're right to say so, because they didn't last very long and they only made 99 of them. But this is a Gordon Keeble. The story actually begins with three people. There is John Gordon, who was managing director of Peerless, who made motor cars. There is Jim Keeble, who was just a mechanic from near Ipswich. And then there is a guy called Rick Nielsen, who was a US bomber pilot, who actually wanted Jim Keeble to fit a small block V8 to a Peerless. So the whole story starts with just an American wanting a V8 in his British car. Jim Keeble actually agreed to do it, but he thought it'd be easier to do it at the Peerless factory in Slough. So he went down, started doing this project for this American pilot, and it was actually John Gordon, who is the managing director, who took an interest in the whole project because Peerlesses weren't doing too well, sales were a bit slow, and John wanted a new project. So he convinced Jim to actually start from scratch and design a whole new car. So Jim started a design for a tubular chassis. The tubular chassis that sits under here is what he designed. He designed that in 1959. He put a de Dion rear axle with Watt linkages, and it was actually John Gordon who then, with his Peerless hat on, went to the Turin Motor Show and started negotiating with Bertone, the amazing coach building company in Italy, who were going to design the body. And they agreed a deal where their new upstart, as it were, a young chap called Gigetto Giugiaro, in his Bertone employment, actually designed the body for this car. The other job was then to find an engine. So John Gordon went over to the States, and one of his friends is a chap whose name I cannot remember because he's got quite a long, complicated name, but he was known as the father of the Corvette. He didn't create it, but he's one of the main engineers on the car. He actually drove one of the prototypes they did and said it was quicker than his Corvette. It was then Ed Cole, who was the managing director of GM at the time, who actually took an interest in the project himself, and he agreed to supply a run of 327 cubic inch, that's 5.4 litre V8s that were meant to be going into the new Corvette Stingray. Now this is the first time in history that any non-GM manufacturer has been given engines from GM to put in their own cars. So the deal was struck, everything was sorted, but sadly financial struggles meant that after their big launch in 1960 showing the prototype, no cars were actually built until about 1964. They did eventually find the funding and production began down in Southampton at the old Eastleigh Airport. Now a little note for you history nerds like myself, these cars were actually, the production started in the same building where the first ever Spitfire prototype was built in 1936. As some of you may or may not know, some of the huge costs about making new cars is getting all the tooling, it's getting everything made to press steel panels for the body. So what was very common in period was that these cars would be made out of fiberglass. Some people turn their nose up at fiberglass, but it's an amazing material, lightweight, easy to work with. And around Southampton, in some of the old aircraft factories and the shipbuilding, there are a lot of people who are very, very good craftsmen. So that was decided to be the way to go on the body. And so that's what we have before us. You've got an American V8, an Italian-style body, built in Britain, and it's all made out of fiberglass. The other advantage of the fiberglass is this is lovely and lightweight. When you drive this down the road, it just feels like you're actually sitting on a chassis with an engine. It feels lovely and light, it's not heavy, it's not cumbersome, and it's just an absolute joy. It really, really is. And it's super, super comfortable. I mean, you really could do many, many miles in this car. The other comfort from these is obviously being a Chevy small block V8. There are parts available. We know now that, it's the most produced engine in history. We know how robust this is, we know how strong it is, and it's still being built to this day, I believe. So if I'm wrong on that, do please correct me. A little bit about this specific one. So as I said earlier in the video, just 99 of these were built. There was a 100th built about 4 years after production ended, but just out of bits and parts. This car's actually chassis number 55. Now, unfortunately, it's a shame there's not a huge history file of loads of paperwork. There are some invoices for a lot of expensive work done by the current owner, but there isn't a huge amount of physical paper history going back. However, thanks to the amazing Gordon Keeble Owners Club, who are very active, have some really, really, really standout people who they take it so seriously and really really take that responsibility of looking after the history of these cars. We actually know pretty much every owner of this car from new. So the history is known, it's just not in paper form. And we also know that back in the late 80s, early 90s, this car was owned by a chap who we think had 5, 6, maybe even 7 Gordon Keebles at one time. So he really was trying to out eccentric everybody, I think is the way to put it. More recently, this car was in Germany, as you may have seen from some of the other photos. It's actually got some rally clocks in it. It wasn't aggressively rallied. We're talking about regularity tours. And the nice thing about that is it did many of them over a number of years. I generally find in my experience that people who do these rallies, they really look after their cars. Their cars have to be mechanically strong. They have to be able to do the distance and be reliable. So I think that's a really good thing. The car was bought by the current owner earlier last year, and he spent a good chunk of money that's all invoiced in the file with an amazing engineer who has gone through the car. The owner is someone who hates it if something doesn't work. So everything was gone through, everything needed attention was dealt with, and I must say, she isn't a show queen. She looks beautiful in the photos, but she's not a concours car, but she is absolutely fabulous to drive, mechanically sound, and I think that's what everyone really, really wants in a car. So, do chuck some comments down. If you've got any questions about the car, if you want to know anything more about it, do let me know, and I hope you've enjoyed the video and learnt a bit more about Gordon Keebles.